So task 3 for 20 marks, and this task will have some section. So we have a section A, B, and a C and D. So and this is the breakdown for 20 marks. The first part is quite straightforward and just asking for the true and false, but we need to make sure we understand the question and we also understand what if this is a false, what could be the right one, what could be the true one. For example, if we look at the first one, the question is saying here, identify whether each of the following statements in relation to limiting factor is true or false. Now, the limiting factor is basically the area is quite complicated and tricky. We have to understand few things for the limiting factor. The limiting factor means where we have a shortage of the resources. Now, shortage of the resources means could be a labor hour or the material. That means we have enough demand in the market, but we cannot fulfill the demand. The reason we don't have enough resources, either we don't have the skill level or we don't have our material enough to complete the demand or fulfill the demand. Here, when you do the limiting factor, we always need to consider a few things. The first thing we need to consider that is the relevant cost. Relevant cost. Now, relevant cost means we only consider the variable cost or the cost that is relevant to create any additional unit. For example, if there is any fixed cost, if there is any fixed cost, or if there is any committed cost, we called it sunk cost. And sunk cost we need to ignore. We do not consider. So when you take a decision, we do not consider. The reason we do not consider that because this cost will happen anyway. For example, rent. We have to pay the rent anyway. Either we go for the new production or we make some new unit or not. For example, our plan was to make a 5,000 units. So if I like to make 5,500 units, so for the additional 500, I only need to consider the variable cost, not the fixed cost, because I have to pay the rent, I have to pay the fixed cost anyway. So it's very important to understand that. The next point is understandable and very important to understand, that is um, called limiting factor per scarce resources. Limiting factor per scarce resources. Scarce resources means the resources we have shortage, for example, the labor hour or the material or the machine hour. Now, when you calculate which product we like to make, for example, you have a three product A, B, and C. Now, let's say the contribution from A is 10, contribution from B is 20, and contribution from C is 30. So contribution per unit. So if I sell one unit, I will have a contribution 10, 20, and 30. So remember that which unit we're going to make first, A, B, or C. It look like even C because C giving us the higher profit. But because of the limiting factor, we do not consider that. We consider the contribution per limiting factor. So to find it out, this one, we have to know what is the labor hour or machine hour required to make one unit. For example, let's say labor hour. So for example, we need 1 hour to make one A. We need, for example, 2.5 hour to make B, and we need 4 hour to make C. Now we have to divide. So 10 divide 1, that gives me 10. Then 20 divide 2.5, that gives me 8. And 30 divide 4, and that gives me 7.5. So this is contribution per limiting factors. So at the beginning we said C give us the more contribution, so we should make C first, but actually we can see no, we should make A first, because to make A I need less resources. So for that reason my ranking will be A number 1, and B number 2 and C number 3. So very important to understand. The question will make you confused with the contribution per unit. So we'll choose the wrong one. This 2 point is very important. Now let's go back to the question and look at this statement and say is it true or false. The first one is says sales growth. Sales growth is unlikely to restrict the overall level of the budget for the most organization. This cannot be true. This is definitely false because sales growth is something can restrict the overall level of the budget. For example, not every business have the unlimited capacity or capability to make the production of unlimited unit. So if the sales is increase suddenly, if the demand increase suddenly, then the production department and other department have to cope with that. So for example, if the sales department said next month our sales will be increased by 500%. So this month it was 10,000. Next month it will be, for example, 50,000. Now the production department has to take the data from the sales department so that they can make the production. And to make the production department need all the resources. So they need the labor hour, they need the machine hour, they need all the resources. So definitely, if the production department don't have the capacity, uh, they will not be able to comply with the sales growth. So it's very important. Sales growth obviously is not unlikely to restrict the overall level of the budget for most organizations. Sales growth is very important. So obviously it could restrict the overall budget. So if they said in the exam, likely, then it will be true. But if it say unlikely, it will be false. So you need to make sure you understand both way because in the exam they'll not give you the copy exactly. So you have to remember that. The next one is says fixed cost should be ignored when deciding on the optimal production mix where there is a short-term limiting factor. This is true because as I said, the fixed cost need to be ignored as a sunk cost. So when we have an optimal production mix, um, in a short-term limiting factor, we can ignore the fixed cost because the fixed cost is not an incremental cost. So for that, we don't have to pay additional money. The fixed cost or the rent we have to pay anyway, we can ignore that. But remember that fixed cost is a fixed cost, fixed as a whole. Fixed cost is fixed as a whole, but fixed cost can be increased or decreased based on per unit. That means if I make more unit, the fixed cost per unit will be less. If I make a less unit, the fixed cost per unit will be more. The next one is says the budget for the principal budget factor should only be established once all other budget items have been calculated. That's not true. This is also false. All the principal budget factor should be considered. It's not necessary like you have to first calculate all the other, then you have to do that. No, you can't do that. So you really don't have to make sure like other budget item have been calculated. Then you establish the principal budget factor. No, the principal budget factor you can establish before that. The next one we have here, opportunity cost of obtaining an additional unit of scarce resources is equal to the additional contribution that unit generate. This is not true because the opportunity cost of obtaining an additional unit of scarce resources is equal to not the additional contribution, but to the variable cost that unit generate. So if I consider the opportunity cost, I only consider the variable cost, not the contribution. Contribution is not important. The variable cost in the exam, if they say the opportunity cost obtaining an additional unit of scarce resources is equal to the variable cost that unit generate, then you have to say true. But here they said additional contribution. That's not true. That's false. Contribution per unit should be used to decide which product are manufactured when a business has a limited Availability of the resources. This one we have discussed here. So contribution per unit should be decide should be used to decide. No, remember that contribution per unit will not decide which one I should make. Contribution per scarce resources. Scarce resources. Remember that contribution per unit for A was 10, B was 20, and C was 30. But we didn't consider that. We considered this one, contribution per scarce resources. So that's why we say we need to make A first, then B, C, not C, even though C giving the highest contribution per unit. We do not consider contribution per unit. We consider contribution per limiting factor. So we said this is also false. So this is our first true and false side. Let's move to the next one. The next one we have here. SL Product Limited is looking at the possibility of manufacturing a new product, H1. So they are considering to make a new product, and the product is called HN1. Colin Smith, the production director, has been asked to undertake an evaluation as HN1 is quite different from the existing product range. It will initially be trial for 12 months. Okay, so initially they'll make the trial for 12 months. Okay, so after 12 months they want to see they will go ahead or not. Okay, the anticipated annual demand for HN1 is 2000 units. So this is the anticipated estimated budget. That's the estimated for the annual demand for the year. So we are expecting 2000 units of HN1 will be sold. So this is our demand for the whole year. Although there is a large degree of uncertainty is estimate. Very important this word. Even there is a large degree of uncertainty. So that means this 2000 unit could be plus or minus. It's not 100%. It could be less than 2000 unit. The demand could be more than 2000 unit because there is a large uncertainty. Now this one is very important because we have to mention this one when you're going to write the report. The detail of the estimated production cost of HN1 is produced by SL Product Limited is contained in the below table. Okay, we have a data and the notes. So you can see the data and the notes. The direct material that is relevant. Remember that this is a additional. So looking for a new product. New product means the company already have some existing product anyway. For example, the company making another product called O2. Now they try to make HN1. That means for the O2, they have to pay the rent, they have to pay all the fixed cost anyway. So we do not consider the fixed cost for HN1. We only consider the variable cost. Remember that, relevant cost. Okay. Direct material, yes, this is relevant. So let's try to see how much is the DM. Direct material, they said 0.25 kilo and per kilo is 40 pound per unit. So looking at how much will be the cost to make 1 unit. Okay, so estimated production cost of HN1 if produced by SL Product Limited. So if you see the word if produced, that means they have intention to outsource as well. So if they make by themselves, that will be the cost here. But it is possible they can buy from outside. But we need to first calculate how much it will be the cost if I make myself, and if I buy from outside, how much will be the cost. So the cheaper one I'll go for, and I'll see how much I save if I go for the cheaper one. So we have here 0.25 kilo multiply 40 pound per kilo. That will give me 10 pound. And then you have a direct labor. Direct labor also relevant because it's a variable cost. The existing workforce are working at full-time capacity, but production of HN1 could be achieved through overtime. So this is one important point. Employee need to work overtime. So when you analyze the non-financial performance, or when you talk about the non-financial factor, you have to talk about that, about the overtime. So non-financial matter or factor, you have to say maybe the employee will not be willing to work overtime. So they are working full time anyway. So they're working at full capacity, but they have to work extra hour to make the new product. So is it a question like all the employee will be available to do the extra hour, or like they might say like we don't like to work overtime, so it need to be considered. Each HN1 would take 30 minutes to produce. Hourly rate for the worker is £12 per hour, with the overtime is twice. So overtime will be £24 per hour and 30 minutes. 30 minutes, so you can find for the 1 hour, then you divide by 2, or you can divide by 60 and multiply by 30, the same thing. So rate is 24 because HN will be produced by using the overtime, and overtime rate is twice. So it will be 24. So 12 multiplied to twice, 24 per hour. So it's a direct labor. We need zero point 0.5 hour. So that is basically 30 minutes. So 24. And that will give us 12. Then we have the machinery. The machinery said existing machinery is available for the production of HN1. The machinery originally cost 60,000 and is depreciated over 5 years at 12,000 per year. So 5 multiplied 12 is 60,000. So you understand the useful life for the asset is 5 years left. But the question is, to make this HN1, do I need to buy the new machine? The answer is no, because the question is telling me that existing machinery is available for the production of HN1. So I really don't have to spend money to buy the new machinery. In this case, this is not relevant to me because I'm going to use the machine company already have. Maybe after 5 years, I'll consider because the useful life will be finished. But for the time being, for 12-month trial period, I really don't need to buy the new machine. So this is irrelevant for me. I will not consider that as a part of the cost. Supervisor. Existing supervisor are unable to supervise a new product. So that means the supervisor already have, they don't have time to supervise a new product. So that means this is a relevant cost. I need to spend some money. Therefore, a new supervisor would be required to work solely on HN1. So completely this guy will work for to make this product HN1. Supervisors are paid an annual salary of 18,000. Okay, so annual salary per year is 18,000, but we are looking at how much is the cost per unit. So in a year, how many unit we going to make? 2,000. So 18,000 is the cost for the whole year, and for the whole year our plan is to make 2,000 units. So 18,000 divided by 2,000, and that gives me 9 per unit. So 9 per unit. So supervisor cost 9 per unit. This is relevant. And the next one, we have a factory rent. Normally rent is always irrelevant. Normally rent is not relevant at all. Existing factory space would be used to produce HN1, annual cost 9,000. So I'm going to use the existing factory space. Really don't have to spend any money for the rent for the new product. So it said this is irrelevant for me. So I have a 10, 12, and 9. So that will be 22 plus 9, 31. 31 per unit. So if I make this one of the HN1, that will cost me 31. Now the next point will be here, is it better to make or is it better to buy? Let's look at the comparison. Colin has identified a supplier. So this supplier should be from outside, from the third party. Total Components Limited. So this is the name of the company. Total Components Limited. Who can produce HN1 for a cost of 30 per unit plus a delivery cost of 150 for 50 unit. Okay, so 30 pound will be the cost. So production cost 30 pound and the delivery cost will be 150 divided by 50 unit. So 150 divided by 50. So that will give me 3. So how much it is total? 33. So 33 will be outsourced. So if I don't make myself, if I buy it from outside, that will make me cost 33. So if I make myself 31, so you can see the difference. So 31 and 33, the difference is 2 pound. The difference is 2 pound per unit. So for 2000 unit, multiply 2000. So 2000 multiply 2. So 4000 pound I can save. 4000 pound I can save every year if I make myself, not to buy from outside. Now this is the so far calculation story. So the total component, total component are a large manufacturer in the industry have an experience working for a component of SL Product Limited. Although the products that they produce are always of high standard, they have in the past issue with meeting delivery deadline. That's very important. So they couldn't deliver the product on time. So they have some issue previously. That means this is the non-financial matter. We have to say, like, what is the guarantee we have? They will not do it again. Maybe in future they could do same for the new product H and one, and they will not be able to deliver on time. So this is possible. This is a non-financial matter we have to consider. Also, they said the total component limited can deliver a maximum of 2000 unit per year. So this is another factor we have to consider. Remember the question told us before it could be plus minus because very uncertain. So the demand is uncertain. That means it could be 2000 plus or minus. Now, the total component can deliver only maximum 2000. That means if it is more than 2000, they will not be able to deliver anything. So that's a risk. That's another non-financial matter we have to consider. All right, so here it says calculate the estimate in-house production cost per unit that we have calculated 31. So this is already done. Let's move to the next part. The next part is saying definitely they will ask for the report for that. Let's look at the report. Say evaluate form a purely financial perspective. So they're asking 2 points. One is from the financial point of view and one is from the non-financial point of view. So financial perspective and for non-financial. This non-financial perspective, you can actually memorize it because most of the time it will be by default and you really don't have to link always the scenario. So this non-financial factor for 4 marks will be always in the exam. And if this question come, make or buy, or obviously yeah, this 4 marks will be there for the non-financial factor. So you can just memorize 4 or 5 factor. As long as this question come, you can write immediately because this one really not much a link with the question. Okay, so let's look at the financial factor first. This is a 6 month. So remember that you have to write a little bit more for the 6 marks. And evaluate. Evaluate means you have to write what's happening. So you need to show some calculation and you need to say some good side and you need to say some disadvantage. So in-house or buy. So you have to say both. So what is the advantage if I make myself? What is the disadvantage if I make myself? What is the advantage if I buy from outside? What is the disadvantage if I buy from outside? So the first one I will say making cost because I didn't show the outsource cost. So I didn't show it outside. So outsource cost. In the top, I only calculate the in-house. That was 31. Now the outsource cost we calculate 33 pound. You need to show the calculation here, how you calculate that. So 30 plus the delivery cost, the way I showed before, you need to show in the box. So you have to say outsource cost 33 pound. That is 2 pound more per unit than in-house cost. So outsource cost 33 pound, that is 2 pound more than in-house cost. So this is the first point. For this one, you will get 1 mark easily. Now you will say, you can say another word here or another sentence, annual saving by in-house will be 4,000 pound. Annual saving, because 2,000 unit is the demand. So 2,000 multiplied 2, it is 4,000 will be saving per year. Now I have to say some good thing and bad thing. The first thing I'll say, the uncertainty. However, the uncertainty is involved with the demand. Is involved with the demand, and higher and lower demand can change the in-house cost. So higher or lower demand can change the in-house cost. It's very important to understand this point. How is it work? That means if my fixed cost is increased, that means my cost per unit could be decreased. If the fixed cost is if the unit is more, then fixed cost per unit will be decreased. Let me show you what does that mean. So before we have calculated the supervisor cost, and if you remember, the supervisor cost was 18,000 for 2,000 unit. Now, a supervisor cost was 18,000 pound for 2,000 unit, and for that reason, it was 9 per unit. Now, for example, for some reason, if the demand is not 2,000, so let's say supervisor cost will be is still 18,000, but the demand is now 1,800, not 2,000, because it is uncertain. So how much will be the cost? Now you can see the cost will be 10. If the demand is 1,500, so it will be 18,000 divided by 1,500, that will be 12. So that means if the unit demand is decreased, the supervisor cost will increase. So if this is the case, what will happen? My total in-house cost will be increased, and maybe my in-house cost will be more than the outsource. So you have to be very, very careful to mention this word because they use the word uncertainty. So you have to consider that. The next one, we also have to say, like the other one, the supply, because the outsource company, Total Component, said they can only deliver 2,000 unit maximum. So what happen if the demand if the demand exceed 2,000 unit, then what will happen? Because the outsource company, they will not be able to provide more than 2,000 unit. So this is also important to consider. So for that reason, we have to make sure we have to mention both, because if the demand is suddenly very high and if the outsource company said like we cannot provide you more than 2,000, then we'll be in trouble. So it's very important to discuss both sides, because our profit will be less, our demand will be high, but we cannot fulfill the demand, so we'll have a less profit and company will suffer for that. So sensitivity analysis need to be undertaken. So our recommendation will be sensitivity sensitivity analysis need to consider. Now, what is sensitivity analysis? Sensitivity analysis means what happened if any of the cost is changed. For example, if the demand is decreased by 10%, if the material cost is increased by 5%, if the labor cost is increased by 5%, so we need to see which one is more sensitive. So more sensitive means which one, even though little percentage changes will have a over effect. That means from the profit, the company could end up with a loss even only 1% or 2% changes. So if anything is more sensitive, we have to consider that one more. For example, uh, even if the demand is decreased by 5% or 10%, the company will be still in a profit. But if the labor cost increased by 10%, maybe the company will be in loss. That means labor costs are more sensitive than the demand. So we need to analyze the sensitive analysis. So we have to discuss all this thing here. So first we'll show the calculation and we'll show how much the company will save and then we'll say like what will happen if the demand could not be fulfilled and what happened if the demand goes high. So you need to show some workings. Remember that we are talking here the financial perspectives. So you only talk about how much money company lose, how much financial or monetary value involved with this analysis, with the evaluation. So we need to make sure we use some calculation and give some figure because it's a financial perspectives. But on the other hand, the non-financial perspectives, we don't have to give any financial method, any financial number. We don't have to give anything there. But with the financial, we have to make sure we have to write at least 1.5 sentence for each mark. So that means for 6 marks, we need to write for every mark 1.5 sentence. So you need to make sure you make a point for that. And the financial number also mention when you explain that. So you need to explain the uncertainty both side. You need to say like in-house good or bad side and by production or outsource good or bad side, and you give your recommendation like the company need to do the sensitivity analysis with some number. Okay, now let's talk about our non-financial factor. So there is 4 marks. 4 point will be more than enough. So you need to just mention 4 point. If the question say identify four non-financial factor, you really don't have to explain too much. Remember that. Identify means just you need to identify the non-financial factor. Even sometimes if you see the answer, you see they explain a lot. Remember that you don't have to explain. For every factor you identify, you will get 1 mark. So you need to make sure you save the time. If you keep writing, you'll be running out of time for the other question. So you need to make sure you just identify. If the question said evaluate, then you have to explain. You have to say all the good props and con. But if the questions are identify, do not spend much time to explain. All right. So said identify four non-financial factors that SL Product Limited may wish to consider before making a final decision on whether to make the product or buy from the total component. Okay. So the first one, as I said before, like the first one we say like resources. Resources are available. Available. We can say example. All employees willing to work overtime? So you need to make the question mark because we don't know. The question telling us to make the H1, all the employee need to work on the overtime, but we don't know they will work overtime or not. So this is the first thing we need to say it is non-financial factor. Then the next one is said we need a additional supervisor because the existing supervisor we have, they cannot do that work. So my question is there any qualified supervisor available? So is there any qualified or skilled supervisor available, and they said 18,000 will be the cost. So I want to know, is this 18,000 is reasonable? So even though you don't have to mention because it's a non-financial factor, I think that will be enough. Then the next one, we can say, the next one, they said the machinery have a useful life for 5 years. So we can mention this one. So we can say the useful life of the machine is 5 years left. So what will happen after 5 years time? So useful life for the machinery is 5 years remaining. What will happen if they go ahead for a long-term production? Because this machinery cannot use after 5 years. Then the other point, the question mentioned like before, the total component, they couldn't deliver the product on time. So what is the guarantee they will do it again? So we can say here, uh, more investigation required to make sure that total component will deliver the product on time. And what else? And also you can say sensitivity analysis need to carry out to take better decision. It's important like to take the sensitivity analysis. All right. So I think that's it. That's all we have to write for the non-financial factor. All you have to do, you have to say a few things that is not relevant to the number, and I'm sure like you'll be absolutely fine if you write all of this. But for the 4 marks, do not spend a lot of time to write, just identify and write few words. You'll be absolutely fine for that. All right, so this is kind of, I think, the end of the question.